Okay, we're gonna get started. Audio's good? Yeah, wait up everyone. We wanted to get started in a good way, so we're gonna ask Elder former Chiefs Charlene and Nancy to come up and give us the children's prayer as well as a drum song before we get into Elder Jean's opening prayer to start.
Ma conjichten, rich mammald, de goik aid, elda host kneems mistak twet. Kchmammel, dak skeel, dak de deed, elma ma de deed, ma de eat hus. Kchmammel, dak balsam, el ilwach, dak plap, quick usam. Dag chmammeld, dag nog gestuut, dag belk seltens as je gemindem. Kchmammeld, da swachoistem, dag sweat. Ma kwakan jeengeden, wel je anna dag chmammeld. I will say prayer for the children who cry and no one hears. For the children who wake up hungry and go to bed hungry. For the children who are missing and for those who are lost. For the children who suffer alone, because they have no one who cares. For the children that no one loves, I will pray for these children. Iri gukstjatskul.
Gukstjatjum spew sekusent nochen, Charlene Bellew and Squext. I want to just take time to do a moment's silence for those children that are missing and that we're looking for. While we do this moment of silence, I'd like us to remember Margaret Sita. She's one of them that we interviewed and has passed on, and our condolences to her family and to her community. But thank you for giving her time to come and share her truth with us before she left. So we'll just take time to do a moment's silence for the children that are missing and for the children that we'll be talking about today. We're going to sing Jeannie's healing song. Jeannie Dick is from Alkali Lake. She was a residential school survivor. She's passed on into the spirit world, but went to the mountains so that we could have songs for days like today for healing. This is Jeannie's healing song. We're praying for healing for our chief and council, all of our technical team, and all of the people that are watching this today from all over the province, and especially for the survivors that are joining us live and on Facebook. We pray to you through this healing song.
Wait koidap. Na Eliapin de Sietert. My sound and wait geld cookbe. As we stels na Eli hojam. Do you ja to it so ech. My sound and wait geld cookbe. Is go kon staan we white go. Geld cookbe. Juka so kon jeans we go. Knohendels elia. De gaat de zo ech. Dag studien we slespen white. En stemet. White is slachtig white. Een goed judge. En een wheat geld koekbe. We is gewoon een go geld koekbe. En earlier, dus eigenlijk suico. Toch, toen daarom. Is heb het snoten we suico. Dags joinde me sleppendem. Smemmeld. White is smelled. You can wait geld koekbe. Maar gaan nu een goeie. Ze staat ze sleppen. Is lemmen. Lemmen de we white koch. Echt de quick eus me spien de sietert. Het kook sterk koch. White. Knoegmens we go. Koekbe. Knoegmens. Het white. Dem elksens. Je ene. Gaat is elkst. Geld koekbe. Ze jeans we go. Ze kon jeans we go. Je put knogendels en elie hoedje. Je gemeente go. Geld koekbe. Je gemeente go white en elie. Til elkstes. White en elie. De zo echt. Geld koekbe. Sterk white lee stem en elie hoedje. Men lokkelige staas slepen hem stem. Staas truit men dem stem en elie geld koekbe. Je gemeente white no do echt. Men kwant toen daar om geld koekbe. Je gemeente white kochen elie hoedje. Men lemmen de white. Gekneemd door je se kon jeans en elie hoedje. Men geld koekbe. Je gemeente white en elie hoedje. Men omkooit en se zeer en klokkelig. Staas is koepie stem. Maar geen stes is. Wel mij juist geld koekbe koek sterk koek de jeans. Goldens we go white is stem elie hoedje. Men klokkelig geld koekbe. Je wees golden jeans geld koekbe white en zal ik het all my relations so. What's that?
Thank you, Elder Jean, Nancy, Charlene. Uplifting would be an understatement in being able to hear the songs and hear the language and feel the prayers in light of what we're going to be announcing today and what's continuing to be announced across this country that we call Canada. We continue to see our ceremonies, our language, our cultures, and our traditions live on. And that's very uplifting to me as a young leader, especially when we start thinking about the emotions that continue to flood through our souls and flood through our hearts. When we start talking about the legacy of residential schools in the St. Joseph's Mission. Wait up, everyone. Good afternoon. Guk beat the kekel. Hello, Chief Willie Sellars with the Williams Lake First Nation of the Secwepemc Nation, and I just wanted to welcome you to the traditional territory. Welcome you to our administration building. Welcome to those viewing online and on TV to hear the announcement today. Sitting with me and holding me up and giving me that strength is our Chief and Council, Councillor Shay Chelsea, Rick Gilbert, Joanne Moise, Shauna Philbrick, Chris Wycott. We have some of our council that's in community right now, making sure that our community is okay. And I'm very thankful for that. We've assembled today to present the initial results from the first phase of geophysical investigation of lands surrounding the former St. Joseph's Mission Residential School. Before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge that the following discussion could be very triggering for people. The presentation involves discussion of Indian residential schools, abuse of children, colonial impacts, and suicide. We recognize that these are extremely challenging topics, but the work that we've been doing is a critical part of uncovering the truth about the history of residential schools in this country. We tried to prepare as best possible by ensuring there are supports in place for those who may require them following today's announcement. To briefly summarize some of those supports, in our council chambers here, we have cultural and wellness supports. In our community, we have those same supports. We have staff from Three Corners Health Services Society. We are putting and finding the balance between modern supports and historical supports, traditional supports. In today's day and age, that's a balance that is very hard to do and hard to find as First Nations people, as leaders in our communities. There's trauma-informed culture, health, and wellness staff at the gym, like I said. We have a sacred fire, and there's going to be health and wellness staff. That sacred fire is going to be at our arbor and is going to start at 3 p.m. following this presentation. For those of us joining through Zoom, First Nations Health Authority mental health supports are online in real time through Zoom, and the Zoom link is posted in our chat box. Feel free to reach out if you need somebody to talk to. I would encourage you to. For our online viewers and anyone at home, there is a crisis support line at the Indian Residential School Services Survivor Society, 1-800-721-0066. That's 1-800-721-0066, and it's available 24 hours a day. We encourage those watching our presentation to connect with their personal support network, their mental health counselors, their spiritual advisors, to process information they'll receive today. Like I said, if you need somebody to talk to, please reach out. I'd like to thank Elder Jean, Charlene, and Nancy again. It really does mean a lot, and the strength that you radiate helps me in our council in the work that we do as elected leaders in the community. I'd like to acknowledge the team, Sugarcane Archaeology, our technical staff, our field staff, our workers that have been living and working through and hearing the atrocities from St. Joseph's Mission for the past 8 months during this investigation, but even before that. You want to acknowledge all of the former leadership that continued to fight the fight in an era that didn't necessarily welcome it. We have political support now, we have nation support, we have Canadian support, and that's not what former leaders had when they started to raise awareness around residential schools and the legacy of those schools in this country. I'd like to thank more partners, the financial support, as I had mentioned, these allies stepping up, the Government of Canada, the Government of British Columbia, Library and Archives Canada, National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation in their facilitation for archival research. I'd like to acknowledge Minister Miller, Minister Rankin, who are participating online. Thank you for your support. Aside from our MP in the region here, you are the quickest to respond to any request and any text that we have put forward. And that does mean a lot. Having that political support is very key to continuing to raise awareness around this legacy. Acknowledge National Chief Archibald and Regional Chief Terry Teegee for participating in the Chiefs meeting this morning and also participating online. Your support is also noted. You have been there every step of the way, and we appreciate that. As I'd mentioned earlier, the focus of this afternoon's press conference is to outline the preliminary results of the Phase 1 geophysical investigation of the former St. Joseph's Mission Residential School and Onward Ranch. Over the next few hours, we'll be discussing the results of the ground-penetrating radar and magnetometry work conducted on site, an outline of archival research conducted to date, and the next steps as WLFN moves through subsequent phases of work at St. Joseph's Mission and the Onward Ranch. A short PowerPoint presentation outlining the results will follow this introduction and will conclude with a brief question and answer session. As we move through the presentation, it is important to remember that these results are preliminary and only reflect the work conducted to date. There are more phases of work to be completed, and our investigation may evolve as new information comes to light. There are approximately 480 hectares of land connected to the operation at St. Joseph's Mission. It's a massive footprint, and we've identified more areas that are requiring investigation. To date, we've done 14 hectares of the broader area that has been subjected, that has been discussed, which is a small footprint around the buildings, around the historical school, around the barns, around the areas of interest that we've been able to identify through our interviews and archival research to date. The St. Joseph's Mission, as I'm sure you're aware, is located just a few kilometers from the Williams Lake First Nation community of Sugarcane, approximately 6 kilometers from where we sit now. The mission was operated as an Indian residential school between 1891 and 1981. During that period, thousands of Indigenous children were forced to attend St. Joseph's. The institution was operated by various religious sects over the years and predominantly controlled by the Roman Catholic missionaries as part of the residential school system set up by the Government of Canada. The Onward Ranch was added to the Oblates holdings in 1964 and operated as a ranch and farm to sustain St. Joseph's Mission. Historically, the lands comprising of the St. Joseph's Mission and Onward Ranch were the traditional lands of the Secwepemc people. Like so many other areas of the province, the land was preempted without consideration for First Nations rights and title. The St. Joseph's Mission officially opened on July 19, 1891 as the Williams Lake Industrial School under the auspices of the Roman Catholic Church. The initial operation of the mission was an industrial school where First Nation pupils performed later labor-intensive tasks including serving white children and staff, timber splitting, cattle rearing, farming, and sewing. During this time, the Sisters of St. Anne ran the St. Joseph's Mission in concert with the Oblates of Mary Immaculate. In 1896, the Sisters of the Child Jesus, Catholic sect of nuns who hailed from France, were summoned to help with the missionary work of the Oblates of Mary Immaculate outside of Williams Lake. The first 4 nuns arrived at St. Joseph's in 1896, and they operated the school for more than 100 years until its closing. As is the case with many other residential schools in Canada, the real story of what occurred at the St. Joseph's Mission has been intentionally obscured. There is clear evidence that religious entities, the federal government, and the RCMP have knowingly participated in the destruction of records and the cover-up of criminal allegations. For decades, there were reports of neglect and abuse at the St. Joseph's Mission, and worse, There were reports of children dying or disappearing from the facility. For the bulk of St. Joseph's Mission history, these reports were at best given no credence. At worst, there was something darker going on in an effort to suppress the emergence of the truth. In May of 2021, Tecumseh's Discretion announced the gruesome discovery of over 200 unmarked graves at the former site of the Kamloops Indian Residential School. The announcement shocked people across the world, jarring many in the public sphere who had not heard of the residential school system. Questions began to pour in. How did this happen? How could the public not know? At Tecumseh, many former students knew the tales of missing children and were aware that there were graves dug for their bodies at the school, but no one believed them. The Tecumseh discovery forced Canadians to acknowledge the reality of residential schools, and that our country had for decades been misled and lied to by religious officials, the federal government, and the RCMP. People were outraged, saddened, and spurred into action. Politicians and public alike scrambled for answers to how Canada was going to reconcile with its First Nations people with regard to Indian residential schools. But there can be no reconciliation before there is truth. A truthful account must be told of the former students' residential school experience, acknowledging the harm of colonial educational practices, recognizing the former students' intrinsic right to the cultural and spiritual practices outlawed by government and religious institutions, and by restoring the familial history lost at the grounds of the mission. The efforts to investigate and reconcile the deaths and disappearances of children at these institutions must be through the leadership of First Nations people and First Nations communities. Today, we have commitment from federal and provincial governments that the investigation into the St. Joseph's Mission will continue through the Williams Lake First Nation, and this is a critical milestone in our path toward reconciliation. And so, over the last 9 months, WLFN has embarked on a journey to seek that truth, so that the survivors or the quomes, the champions, the living ones, can be validated and recognized in the telling of their truths. And so that the atrocities which occurred at the St. Joseph's Mission and across the residential school system in Canada can finally come to light. This journey has led our investigation team into the darkest recesses of human behavior. Our team has recorded not only stories involving the murder and disappearance of children and infants, they have listened to countless stories of systematic torture, starvation, rape, and sexual assault of children at St. Joseph's Mission. Since the very early years, the Oblate brothers advocated stern punishments for children. In fact, an instructor was hired at St. Joseph's for the specific task of being a disciplinarian. Children were lashed to boards inside the barns at the Onward Ranch, beaten until they lost consciousness as a punishment for speaking their language. Students were subjected to other forms of torture, including forcible confinement, intentional starvation, and exposure to extreme environmental conditions. In 1902, 3 children ran away from the school as a result of these conditions. One of those children died. He was 8 years old. He died from exposure, freezing to death alone and outside, while attempting to escape the physical and sexual abuses of the St. Joseph's Mission. His name was Duncan Sticks. An inquest into the conduct of the school administration and school conditions at St. Joseph's Mission was initiated as a result of this tragic death. The investigation showed that excessive use of physical abuse was rampant at the school, as were terrible living conditions, including consumption of rotten food, fire hazards, overcrowding, and illness. Nonetheless, the conditions continued. In 1920, parents wrote to the school to discuss the appalling conditions their children were living in. The letters outline in great detail how 9 children intentionally ingested poison hemlock in an attempt for mass suicide. In order to find a final escape from the deplorable living conditions that was their normal. Tragically, one of these students died as a result. His name is Augustine Allen. At the time, the coroner's service and the RCMP saw no reason to investigate the death, as a child was only an Indian. No further inquest was made by the Catholic Church into the circumstances to prevent further loss of life, and the matter was left to die. Outbreaks of tuberculosis, flu, meningitis, mumps, measles, chickenpox, and other epidemics were rampant throughout the history of St. Joseph's, as were bedbug and mice infestations in the dormitories. The drinking water was repeatedly deemed unsafe for domestic use, and for decades, raw sewage was released from the facility into Williams Lake. Conditions at St. Joseph's deteriorated to the point that their caretakers threatened to abandon the school. In 1952, the Sisters of the Child Jesus threatened to leave the mission as a result of those intolerable living conditions. There is evidence that the public was aware of the conditions St. Joseph's Mission throughout the years. Complaints were made to the Indian agent in charge of the school at those times, but never on behalf of the children's welfare. One alarming complaint from Williams Lake resident indicated that his discontent that he could not compete with the prison labor type production of goods at St. Joseph's Mission. Only due to his lack of profits did he implore the Indian agent to cease allowing child slave labor at St. Joseph's Mission. This era of children receiving extreme physical abuse of part of their schooling was followed by a darker, more explicit chapter in St. Joseph's history. Several prominent members of the clergy that served St. Joseph's Mission, including Father McEntee, Brother Dowdy, and Bishop O'Connor, were tried and convicted of sexual crimes against children in the 1990s. Although new victims came forward, the RCMP at that time refused to try several individuals on additional charges. The RCMP argued that they had served time for similar crimes, had apologized to their victims. In the present day, the WLFN investigation team is discovering just how deep the well of sexual abuse ran at St. Joseph's Mission. The priests have been implicated during the investigation in numerous additional sexual assaults on children as young as 7 years old. Stories of gang rape and molestation have become part of the fabric of the institution's history. So common, as one survivor relates, that if the school intercom requested a child to attend the office, you knew someone was about to be raped. Child pregnancies were widespread and were covered up through a variety of means to avoid drawing unwanted attention to operations at the school. Female students were transferred out of the school to Indian hospitals and unwed mothers' homes. The babies removed from their mothers. In survivor accounts that are disturbing beyond words, we have heard detailed descriptions of how the unwanted babies of certain priests at St. Joseph's were burned in the incinerator. We fast forward to 2021 in the wake of the Tecumloops discovery. On September 30th, the first ever National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, WLFN held a gathering at its Powwow Arbor in furtherance of healing and reconciliation. A convoy of cars from St. Joseph's Mission was led to the Arbor grounds and stretched over 2 kilometers long down Highway 97. Hundreds of people, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike, gathered to pray, to drum, and to sing. The turnout was a powerful indication that truth and reconciliation efforts are welcomed by Canadians and that change may be on the horizon. Sadly, WLFN lost a community member to suicide that day. This serves as a stark reminder that while there is hope that we can heal as a nation, that the trauma of individuals and of communities is still very much present. The abuses suffered at St. Joseph's Mission and other institutions are not forgotten footnotes of the past. The horrors that occurred inside walls of St. Joseph's Mission are still very real for those who live them. And the legacy of these atrocities is still readily apparent in the numerous ways that intergenerational trauma manifests in First Nation communities. After the Tecumloops announcement, so many people stepped forward in order to offer support. What can we do to help? What can we offer? How can we assist? To those people, we thank you. We thank you for stepping up and attempting to ease the suffering of others. But there still remain the disbelievers. Those who would argue that there was somehow a good or benevolent underpinning of residential schools and that this is sufficient justification to discount the horror and suffering that was inflicted upon generations and generations of Indigenous people. Not only is this reasoning distorted and wrong, it also serves to compound the trauma that survivors and their families have experienced and continue to experience to this day. In the words of one survivor, I told my parents, I told the principal, I told the Indian agent, I told the RCMP about my rape, but nobody believed me. We cannot afford to have another generation grow up without understanding the truth of the residential school system and the impact it has had on First Nations people. We need to heal. At St. Joseph's Mission, survivor stories tell us that many children will remain unaccounted for, even after our geophysical and archival work is complete. And that is very scary and disturbing. Their bodies were cast into the river, left at the bottom of lakes, tossed like garbage into incinerators. For those children, there will be no headstone, no unmarked grave, no small fragment of bone to be forensically analyzed. For those families, there will be no closure. It is for those children and families that we grieve the most. The following presentation is only one small snapshot of the investigation into St. Joseph's Mission. The results we're about to disclose are preliminary only. Nonetheless, we have committed to many former students, their families, and to the Indigenous communities affected by St. Joseph's that we will make our best efforts to communicate all of the results of the investigations at regular intervals as we proceed through this process. It is important that these investigations remain in the public eye, that we as a nation continue in an unwavering path forward in our pursuit of the truth with respect to St. Joseph's Mission and other residential schools in Canada. Thank you. I would like to hand the mic over to Whitney Spearing. She's going to lead us through the results of the first phase of investigations over at St. Joseph's Mission. Whitney, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. My name is Whitney Spearing, and I'm the project lead for the St. Joseph's Mission investigation. Thank you all for your attendance today and your support as we move through this investigation. The above slide shows an agenda of topics that this presentation is meant to address, including WLFN response objectives, historic overview of St. Joseph's Mission operations, overview of modern site conditions at the St. Joseph's Mission investigation area, an outline of the preliminary investigation, including a brief description of the technologies employed, and the Phase 1 preliminary geophysical results. Finally, Kupi Willie Sellars will offer some discussion on a path forward. WLFN recognizes that there are First Nations processes and protocols for doing this investigative work that must be adhered to out of respect for the missing and deceased children's families. The investigation team has ensured that all team members, staff, and consultants are informed about Indian residential schools, and that they engage in ceremony for the safety and well-being of survivors and their families. In the wake of the announcement of undocumented graves at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School, Williams Lake First Nation formed an investigation team in order to conduct a similar and all-encompassing investigation of the former St. Joseph's Mission Residential School and Onward Ranch properties. It became clear early on that the team needed a formalized mandate that was culturally appropriate and sensitive to the needs of former students and their families. The team's objectives include engaging local legal and technical experts to develop, implement, and document a culturally appropriate, community-based response for missing and deceased children at St. Joseph's Mission. Assertion of authority for all work related to St. Joseph's Mission investigation. Facilitating a community-based inquiry into St. Joseph's Mission that ensures safety, promotes respect, and enables healing for affected communities and families. And utilizing the profile of this investigation to educate all Canadians about the reality of residential schools and the impact they have had on Indigenous people. The St. Joseph's Mission was operated as an Indian residential school between 1891 and 1981. Thousands of Indigenous children were forced to attend the school, which was administered by the Catholic Oblates. The Onward Ranch was added to the Oblates holding in 1964 and operated primarily as a ranch and farm to sustain the mission and housing for mission staff. This slide shows a comprehensive timeline of St. Joseph's Mission throughout its history. From the opening of the industrial school in 1891 to the closing of the residential school in 1981, the school operated for approximately 90 years. Throughout the history of the school, both the St. Joseph's Mission and Onward Ranch properties have contained dozens of buildings associated with use as an industrial and residential school. The buildings vary in age and include several barns, dormitories, residences, outbuildings, and a historic cemetery. This photo depicts the landscape at the St. Joseph's Mission in the late 1800s. For reference, only one of the structures shown in this photo exists in modern times. The new school dormitory building, as shown in the photo above, was built in 1955. The above photo shows barn structures that still stand at St. Joseph's Mission, and the grassy area in the forefront is indicative of current conditions at the site. The Phase 1 investigation at St. Joseph's Mission involves three components: archival and photographic research, survivor interviews, and the geophysical investigation. The Williams Lake First Nation has been working to identify important archival records, including those housed at the following institutions: the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation, Museum of the Cariboo Chilcotin, Library and Archives Canada, the British Columbia Provincial Archives, the Archdiocese of Vancouver and Prince George, the Northern Shuswap Tribal Council, Eskedem First Nation Archives, and copious amounts of personal and historic archives from community members and the wider public. WLFN is working closely with these entities to determine the best way to access, utilize, and cross-reference all of the available archival material. With the announcement of more records being released to the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation, the investigation team is hopeful that the federal government will make proactive and full disclosure a top priority. At this time, there are several key sets of documents that remain missing, including school quarterly returns between 1941 and 1980, as well as daily registers of pupils between 1941 and 1981. For those who wish to tell us their story, the St. Joseph's Mission investigation team has created a one-stop email in order to facilitate interviews. Survivors are able to arrange their interview as well as have immediate access to health and wellness supports while waiting. Health and wellness supports are in place before, during, and after the interview process. To date, interviews have been conducted with members from Nasco First Nation, Mount Curry First Nation, D'Arcy Naquaqua First Nation, Williams Lake First Nation, Alcacho First Nation, Shweklam First Nation, Eskedum First Nation, and Stone First Nation. Survivor interviews are invaluable in providing insight into the day-to-day operations of the school and living conditions of the students at St. Joseph's Mission. As well, they are key pieces of first-hand evidence which support the claims of deaths and disappearances of Indigenous students from St. Joseph's Mission. These interviews have been instrumental in determining specific target areas for geophysical work within a very large search area. The objective of the geophysical investigation was to conduct a detailed survey covering accessible areas within the Phase 1 boundary to identify and locate any subsurface features indicative of potential undocumented graves. Given the extensive historical use of the lands at St. Joseph's Mission, the geophysical investigation is extremely complex. Networks of utilities, abandoned infrastructure, building remnants, and debris dot the landscape and are being mapped through these techniques in order to better target search areas. The area currently considered under the preliminary investigation consists of approximately 470 hectares of land in the San Jose River Valley. The Phase 1 investigation area contains both the St. Joseph's Mission and the Onward Ranch properties, as well as Canadian National Railway right-of-way and additional agricultural property. This map depicts the entire Phase 1 investigation area. The area outlined in yellow shows the originally identified investigation area, and the area outlined in orange shows the expanded investigation area based on initial survivor interviews and archival material. There is a strong possibility that additional expansion of the investigation will occur given the research and findings presented today. To date, approximately 14 hectares of a total 470 have been subject to geophysical investigation. The area completed to date is represented in solid red on the map above. A combination of techniques have been used in the geophysical investigation at St. Joseph's Mission. These include aerial light imaging rain detection, commonly known as LIDAR, terrestrial LIDAR, low-flight aerial imagery, magnetometry, and ground-penetrating radar, commonly known as GPR. The combination of these techniques give a comprehensive and multifaceted understanding of the investigation area. Light detection and ranging technology, commonly referred to as LIDAR, is a remote sensing technique used to examine the surface of the Earth. A LIDAR unit affixed to a fixed-wing aircraft is used to aim pulses of light at the surface of the Earth. This beam of light is reflected back and collected by the sensor. LIDAR is used to measure range from the aircraft to the surface and is then mapped to show the surface expression of the Earth. This image shows LIDAR imagery for the St. Joseph's Mission site. For reference, in the upper right corner of the screen, various historic buildings and structures can be seen. As well, some footprints of former buildings can be seen, as well as roads, fence lines, corrals, irrigation ditches, and debris. Natural features such as the San Jose River, hills, trees, and large rocks can also be seen using aerial LIDAR. For the investigation team, the LIDAR is a vital tool which details modern buildings and historic property features which may not otherwise be visible in the field. Terrestrial LIDAR is a similar technique, but is used to scan the landscape sideways instead of from the air. Terrestrial LIDAR can be used to scan buildings and to create 3D models. This image shows an example of a building model created through terrestrial LIDAR. The team is using terrestrial LIDAR to map several harder to access areas of the investigation area, as well as to create 3D models of the remaining historic buildings at the St. Joseph's Mission. Just a note on this image, it's an example only and not indicative of a structure at St. Joseph's Mission. Ground penetrating radar, or GPR, is a technique which sends radar pulses into the ground in order to capture images below the Earth's surface. This technique is used to identify features which are below the ground, including utilities, pipes, and other buried objects. The GPR unit sends a radar pulse into the ground where it reflects off of buried objects. This is called a reflection. Buried human remains, caskets, and graves can also produce reflections, and thus GPR is often used in forensic investigations. 2 pieces of GPR equipment have been used in the investigation at St. Joseph's Mission, including a multi-channel system consisting of 8 individual 450 megahertz central frequency antenna and a single-channel GPR system utilizing a 400 megahertz central frequency antenna. Magnetometry was conducted in the investigation area using a multi-channel fluxgate magnetic gradiometer system. The results presented in the next section of this presentation are based primarily on ground-penetrating radar and magnetometry. The site was divided into individual GPR and magnetometry survey grids of varying dimensions to optimize total area coverage. Due to the differences in survey methodologies, the survey areas for each technique vary. A total of 99 GPR survey units and 71 magnetometry survey grids were collected. Areas outlined in blue on this map show the extent of the magnetometry grids, and areas outlined on pink in this map show the extent of the GPR survey grids. The St. Joseph's Mission investigation team have surveyed approximately 14 hectares with GPR and magnetometry survey. All reflections seen in the GPR data have been marked and reviewed through a rigorous quality control process. To date, 93 reflections have been recorded at the St. Joseph's Mission. All of them display varying characteristics indicative of potential human burials. These 93 reflections have been categorized as either high probability or low probability based on their location, reflection type, surroundings, geometry, and depth. One consideration for the investigation team is that the St. Joseph's Mission area contains a historic cemetery. This cemetery has been used occasionally in modern times and was actively used during the operational time period of the school. In order to obtain the most accurate results across the investigation area, GPR was conducted both inside and outside of the existing cemetery. GPR analysis of the existing cemetery and known burial features gives the investigation team good comparative data for reflections elsewhere in the investigation area. The team is working diligently to understand how the 93 potential burials correlate with the historic and modern extent of the cemetery. Current data suggests that 50 of the potential 93 burials are not associated with the cemetery. The investigation team have mapped out existing graves and the modern extent of the cemetery and taking detailed recordings of headstones. This work has been supported through records obtained through the following records: Oblates of Mary Immaculate, including interment records, Museum of the Caribou-Chilcotin Archives, including a comprehensive ground survey conducted in 2008, and photographic and archival material which describe the use and dimensions of the cemetery throughout time. It is important to note that there is still much work to be completed within the Phase 1 area of the investigation, including additional GPR and magnetometry grids, detailed analysis of records related to interment and burial at the historic cemetery, and investigation into the implications of potential incineration of human remains at St. Joseph's Mission. While this additional work will provide more understanding of the St. Joseph's Mission and the 93 reflections, it must be emphasized that no geophysical investigation can provide certainty into the presence of human remains. Excavation is the only technique that will provide answers as to whether human remains are present within the reflections in the St. Joseph's Mission investigation area. Next slide. Thank you all for your attention today and your continued support as we move through these challenging undertakings. Our investigation team is committed to seeking resolution and truth for those survivors and families who have lost children through the residential school system at St. Joseph's Mission. Chief Willie Sellars will now discuss a path for moving forward through the investigation from today. Thank you.
Thank you, Whitney. Regardless of how many times we hear and we see and process the information presented today, it does not get any easier. 93 is our number. I wanted to just state, although WLFN has been leading the technical exercise and investigation at St. Joseph's Mission, there was multiple nations that were impacted by the legacy of that school. Chilcotin Nation, Diquet Nation, Newhall Nation, other Secwepemc communities in the Secwepemc Nation, Statlium Nation, to name a few. All of these communities are asking us questions, and they have concerns, and holding up the survivors and holding up those ancestors and leading with ceremony is of utmost importance at WLFN. As we move through this process, there is going to be a lot of questions and concerns, and our team is open for dialogue and discussion, and we're looking forward to working collaboratively together with those other nations as we discuss next steps in this first phase of investigation. I want to acknowledge all of the current survivors and those who stepped up and took an interview with us and shared their story and really, helped us get to where we are today. The strength of those individuals is breathtaking, to say the least, and our heart goes out to them. I'd like to acknowledge the ranch owners for their willingness and cooperation in allowing us onto their property to perform the investigation and do the necessary work and tech exercises throughout this investigation period. And without their cooperation and collaboration, we wouldn't have been able to do that, so thank you. Given the implication of the results today, we realize there is going to be a lot of questions regarding next steps. And we might not have all of the answers, but we do have a strategy. There are many unknowns, and we're committed to following our said strategy in the days, weeks, and months ahead. Our team is immediately going to be engaging and dialoguing with the Government of British Columbia and the Government of Canada in order to implement protection measures by any means necessary at the St. Joseph's Mission site. Preservation of the site, any evidence present, and human remains is a key priority moving forward. Security patrols will be on a 24-hour basis, and additional site security measures will be installed to protect the site. We want to stress that this is only a small portion of the Phase 1 area that's being investigated and subject to a geophysical investigation. A lot of work remains ahead of us, and there's a continued need for financial support to fund the various next phases of this work. In the coming weeks, the team will engage directly with the communities where children are known to be missing or deceased to discuss the investigation and return records and photographs of their children who were lost through the residential school system at St. Joseph's Mission. Continuation of archival research, retrieval of records where records are missing or redacted. And we're going to be determining the next steps, what the next steps will be in relation to the 93 reflections or anomalies, and whether there is required excavation in regards to those anomalies. The team acknowledges that this is a complicated issue and one that is not easily resolved. However, the discussion must begin in order for these types of decisions to be made. There has been a reawakening in Indian country that started at KIB in the 215. We've had numerous emails and concerns and inquiries flood into our community downplaying the impacts of these schools. To those individuals, we hope that we have opened your mind and we have turned your thoughts towards what that legacy actually was. This reawakening in Indian country has allowed us to start the healing process in First Nations people, in our communities. You know, I was once asked when reconciliation was going to be achieved, and my response was 7 generations from now. With this reawakening in Indian country, we could expedite that healing and reconciliation process. Reconciliation is an education. By educating our regions, by educating our provinces, by educating our politicians, we will educate this country, and we will be in a place where we can flourish as First Nations people, and I truly do believe that. We understand this is a lot to process, and there's going to be many questions. In the following days, please direct any questions you may have to our WLFN team. Our email is sjmission@wlfn.ca, and will be available online in the chat box. With that, I would like to conclude our presentation today and open it up for questions and comments.
We have pre-scripted questions.
We do.
Good afternoon. My name is Aaron Manella. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for the Williams Lake First Nation. Prior to today's press conference, we had a number of pre-submitted questions from media, and so I'll be going through the questions. There are a total of 6. I'll attribute the name of the media agency, ask the question, and then respond accordingly with an answer. And then I understand that there are a number of pre-scheduled interviews that will be held after this press conference. The first question comes from the Williams Lake Tribune. Thank you, Monica, for being present. And the question is, how do the ground-penetrating radar results found during the preliminary investigation correspond with the information survivors have shared? And the answer is, there has been a direct correlation between some of the information provided by the interviewees. Is it expected that the more interviews that are conducted, the more information will be collected? And the answer is, well, we anticipate a very wide range of emotions. Emotions such as anger, frustration, deep grief, re-traumatization of past abuses, and relief that may translate into self-harm, criminal actions as a result of the anger expressed, or a journey on healing from the traumas both past and present. A question from Global News, British Columbia. What technology was used to conduct this work? As my colleague Whitney explained very well, we use ground-penetrating radar, or GPR for short, and magnetic gradiometry to complete the work. Ground-penetrating radar uses short electromagnetic pulses to image the subsurface. When the transmitted pulse encounters a difference in certain electrical properties in the ground, part of the energy will reflect back to the receiver antenna where it is registered. A magnetic gradiometer is measuring the gradient of the Earth's magnetic field near the surface. Another question also from Global News BC. Given the technology and methods used to conduct the investigation, how reliable are the findings at this stage? Both methods used are non-destructive geophysical methods. They measure variations in physical quantities, hence for every investigation, they can only provide indirect information. The reliability of a technique depends on several conditions, such as the ground conditions, local geology, disturbance level, and other elements. Furthermore, it is difficult to put a metric on reliability since various types of information are used during the interpretation, such as the location, the known history, and the current use of an area. A question from ARD German TV. What do these grisly discoveries do for the Indigenous communities in terms of healing and having your voice be heard moving forward? Expressions of finally being heard that may translate into individual, family, community, and we hope nation healing. Ideally for the Indigenous communities, the Indigenous families who attended the St. Joseph's Indian Residential School, our hope is that the land will be returned to the Williams Lake First Nation so that we can protect the site and find further healing. Another question from ARD German TV. Since the discoveries at Tecumloops last spring, It seems like Canadians and the government have finally awoken to the atrocities at the residential schools. Now that this has finally become an open discussion, what can be done to unite all Canadians looking ahead? I mean, one would only dream, one would hope that all Canadians would want to acknowledge the abuses of all forms, whether they be physical, sexual, outlawing spiritual, cultural practices and Indigenous languages. All of these atrocities have occurred at residential schools. And so we acknowledge the truth-telling by former students, correct the injustices perpetrated through reconciliation and restitution. And this comes about in recognizing Indigenous language as the first language of Canada, and restoration of Indigenous languages which are at risk of being extinction. We're so grateful to Elder Jeannie for providing that language at the beginning of this press conference, and can't begin to stress the importance of it.
Any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to our team. We'll be taking interviews, and the biggest stress and the most anxiety that we've got throughout this process is making sure that our community is going to be okay. We have a sacred fire that's organized at our Powell Arbor that's going to be starting at 3 p.m. tonight and running until Friday. We have health supports there. We would welcome anyone and everyone to come and participate, share their story, hear the drums, smell the sage, and just be amongst individuals who are there to support you. I would like to mention and reiterate to every single individual listening, whether it's on our live feed or whether it's on TV, that please make sure that you have your supports in place. Please make sure that you're reaching out and sharing any thoughts that you have, sharing in hugs, sharing your tears. Our prayers are with you. We love you. Looking forward to this healing journey that we're continuing to embark ourselves on as First Nations people in this country that we call Canada. Oh, all my relations. I would like to ask Charlene to come up and lead us in closing prayer with Elder Jean William and closing drum song.
Kukshem, Kukbi, great grandfather, creator of all good things. We pray to you and we thank you for our chief and council, all of our technical team, great grandfather, our elder Jean, Nancy, great grandfather, for being here today to be able to witness the work that has happened with Williams Lake First Nation. To all of the survivors out there, all of your families and communities, we're here with you, we hear you. And as Cookbeat Willie said, we love you and want to make sure that you're okay. In closing, would just like to sing one of Arthur Dick's peace songs. Arthur Dick was a residential school survivor, and before he passed, he always went to the mountains so that we would have songs for days like today. Arthur Dick was a strong advocate for title and rights, and when you look at the history of residential school that Cookbeat Willie talked about, the main intention of governments, even with residential school, was to have access to our lands, access to all of our resources. They didn't win, we're here, and as Cookbeat Willie said, we're going to thrive because of the pain we've been through. So Arthur would want us to find peace within ourselves, within our families, within our nations, that we're going to be stronger for everything that we're going through. So again, thank you to everyone gathering at home. Our hearts are with you. Please take time to pray, do your food offerings, and go to the sacred fires. Kukshem.
And that does conclude the remainder of our press conference. Thank you.